Think with me for a minute about the supracultural automobile. Every automobile has to have a way to steer it, to stop it, a way to propel it, refuel it. It has to have a place for a driver, needs to see in front, around, and behind. He or she needs controls. Every vehicle in any culture has to fulfill these principles and functions. However, given a certain cultural context, a certain environmental context, the vehicle design might be very different. For example, if you lived in Germany with 120 mile an hour autobahns, the characteristics of design that would impact things like road noise and wind noise would be very important. Acceleration might be less important as top speed and being able to run the vehicle efficiently at a very high rate of speed. On the other hand, if you're designing a vehicle to work in an American city, where you're typically going to be driving several hours a day at 40 to 45 miles an hour in stop-and-go heavy traffic, then wind noise is not as important as cabin comfort, as cabin silence from the outside environment, beeping of horns and the whooshing of cars and trucks going by you. You might need that vehicle to accelerate very quickly, but not to be able to operate effectively at a very high rate of speed. So this is the idea that we have when we're talking about the supracultural church. Every church has certain principles and functions that it must fulfill. However, given its cultural context and environment, every church will design how it carries those things out and how it applies those principles and functions and how those translate into the practices and forms of that church very, very differently. It is important that we start from the principles and the functions, but typically what we do is we start from a favorite practice and form of the church, something that we're most comfortable with, or that someone is advocating for us, or that someone is placing over us. For example, a denomination will say, here's how we define the church. Here's how we do church. A cell church might tell all the different cell groups, here's what you will do when you get together. You might read a book about a church or see an example of a great church that was built and try and apply their practices and forms to your cultural context, your environment, the tools that you're using to build that church, and it's just not going to work. But if you start from understanding the principles and the functions of the church, then work that into the cultural context that you're working in, you will come up with very well adapted, very functional, very efficient means for applying and carrying that out through practices and the forms that church will take.